Welcome, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining. We're getting started here in a second. Hope that you all are doing well. I know that some folks are getting ready to go back to school in a week or so. For some folks, really early. Other folks that are ending your summers. I hope at least the alleviation of not having to schlep your kids around to different summer camps creates a little bit of joy as well. As we get started, as people are coming in, feel free to use the chat to answer a question that Ashley from Climb, one of our panelists today, provided on their platform on Climb. And so this is focused on, you have two choices. You can focus on self-awareness or you can focus on appreciation. So what are you feeling the most right now? And you can see a couple of options that are here. You can add your own answers as well. And then if you want to add some appreciation or some gratitude, let's see what you all are feeling in the chat. A lot of excitement. Fun to see. Yvonne, thanks for being here. Matt, curious. Oh, Nikki, I love that. Calm and grateful. Well, thanks again, everybody, for being here. My name is David Ball. I'm the Senior Director of Headstream, and we're thrilled to have you here today. Over the course of the next hour, we're going to explore both the roadmap that we've created at Headstream, as well as hear directly from 4 leaders working with schools and districts on their well-being strategies. I know for a number of you, you're very familiar with Headstream. A number of you, this is probably your first time meeting us. So welcome. Headstream was founded 6 years ago to catalyze technology as a driver for improving the mental well-being of young people, particularly Black, Indigenous, and other youth of color, as well as LGBTQIA+ teens. We've worked really closely with over 50 entrepreneurs, building culturally competent and evidence-backed products through our residency and accelerator programs. Our youth collective has brought together over 100 teens from across the country to integrate authentic youth co-creation into all of our work and all of our participants' work. We've been able to accelerate and access evidence-backed care for over 10 million youth and the caring adults in their lives. Today, we're going to talk about our work focused on providing the education system with the tools and resources to support their students' mental health, which can help us reach another 20 million people in the next 3 years. A little over a year ago, we had this moment of clarity. We had been working in the social tech and the healthcare space for a number of years, and we realized that the majority of the young people we focus on supporting are getting care through schools. We only have about a third of the school counselors and care providers that we need to meet this expanding demand from students. We really felt this sense of urgency to address this. We believe that digital mental health products can be a big part of the solution, not to replace provider care, but to supplement and expand that limited care resource. How can we use these digital interventions to reach those who currently don't have access to care? And what would it look like to bolster and support the existing workforce in providing care? Craig, you should drop your little saying about what the role of technology is. We really like that at Headstream. We believe that that there's 4 areas right now that folks are providing, that digital interventions are providing and supporting schools with care. And so a little definitions first. When we talk about digital mental health interventions, we refer to the use of digital health technologies for mental health support, prevention, and treatment. These products may look like websites, mobile health apps, wearables, virtual reality systems, and other online platforms. like a really important question is why education? Unfair or not, our school systems are the place, as I mentioned, where young people are receiving support for mental health issues when they're receiving that support at all. There's a huge amount of young people who aren't receiving any support. It's really an unfair burden among all the other responsibilities we place on our education system while continuously decreasing resources. We feel that pain. I'm a former teacher and there's others on our team. So we brought together a working group with 12 members with a perspective across the education system to try and address this. The goal of this group was not to shift this burden of youth mental health care away from education systems. That is a worthwhile but medium to long-term effort, and we feel that urgency I discussed, but really to alleviate as much as we can the pain point that education leaders are facing in supporting their students' well-being. There are safe, evidence-driven, and culturally competent interventions in the market. You'll meet Ashley, for example, the founder of one of those, and there are many others in the Headstream Accelerator and residency program. Our work is in support of school districts, taking a cautious approach to digital health tech integrations, and know that there are a number of barriers that exist. The working group focused on how to address these barriers so that we can increase the utilization of digital interventions to support student well-being. All right, you've heard a lot from me, and so I wanted to give you all a sneak peek of the output from this working group. Rolling behind me is the roadmap of digital interventions to support K-12 student mental health, with 4 focus areas and 10 recommendations for action. To prioritize, the working group focused on identifying recommended actions with 4 drivers in mind. The first was to address the students most in need and lacking access to care. The second was to build an example of successful scaling of digital interventions in schools. How do we build on what's working? The third was to consider the resource constraints across K-12 systems in the US. And the fourth was what is needed to support student well-being over the next 18 months. These were the drivers that helped us land on 4 focus areas. Needs assessment, identifying the problem a school or district is trying to solve, both for their mental health strategy as well as with individual students. We have to know what we're trying to solve for before using digital tools as intervention. Product trust and awareness. There's an overwhelming amount of options of digital products. Understanding when they can be useful and how to select the right product is critical to being able to successfully use digital interventions. School system capacity. The working group is grounded in the mission to not have schools and educators take on even more responsibility. This action area focuses on outside organizations and entities that they can support. Sustainable funding for digital products. This work needs resourcing from government funding to philanthropic support to more investment in impactful companies in order to succeed. Our goal is to utilize the roadmap to increase awareness, enhance existing efforts, and foster collaboration. Many of you are already working on similar initiatives. We want to support your efforts. Following the webinar, we'll be sending you an exclusive link to explore the roadmap during this soft launch. Really, over the next few months will be the important and critical point of time. We will engage with potential implementers, funders, as well as beneficiaries and school systems to turn these recommendations to action. In a little bit, we'll talk more about next steps and how you can engage. But first, we want to bring in 4 special guests who are passionate about student well-being and have dedicated their careers to ensuring that we support the mental health of young people. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Megan Gruis, who's going to moderate this great conversation with our 4 panelists.
Awesome. Thank you, David, and welcome everyone. We are so excited just to have a conversation with our panelists who are just experts in this area. And I can't wait for you all to hear from Minh and Grace and Ashley, and really how their work is dedicated to bringing mental health care for youth to life in our education systems, in our healthcare, just in all spaces. Because we know that that need is so very real. David talked about that, why they engaged in this effort with the roadmap, why they even develop a strategic plan around this. We know that schools are understaffed. We know that we're under-resourced. We know that really mental health supports in schools are either reliant on people or they're reliant on something else. And so how can we work together to utilize tools and resources to give students the care that they really need to be well in our society? So let's just dig a little bit deeper. I just want to first talk about mental health and well-being and mental wellness to define, because definitions are really important. So let's just start there. If we think about mental wellness, I like to also look at that as kind of relation to my physical wellness, right? That's a journey over time. And I can imagine our panelists would agree. Like physical wellness is a journey, so is mental wellness. Mental really wellness is that lifelong process and how we can proactively strengthen our own social, emotional, psychological well-being. I work with a lot of schools across the country on how to integrate all of this care. And one of the pieces is the definitions. What do we mean? How do we kind of destigmatize this work and lift up those common definitions? So there's mental wellness. When we think about mental health, it's our state of well-being. How do we realize our own abilities to cope, to relate, to problem solve, to be self-aware so that we can be fruitful in society in general? So I'd love for you in the chat, if you have some definitions around mental wellness, mental health, mental well-being, what are your go-tos and how do you define that work? So we've kind of set out how we're going to define that as we dig in here today. So I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves and then answer a first question because they're all invested in this work. So our first question to our panelists is really to talk about who they are and the spaces and projects that they are currently involved in that work to address youth mental health and well-being. So Minh, let's start with you.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here with you all. My name is Minh, and I have been working in Digital Futures Institute at Teachers College, Columbia University. And if you are not familiar with our college, we mostly major in health, psychology, and education. And we do a lot of work around these three domains. But the big part of my job in Digital Futures Institute is to provide teacher education and support for technology implementation and integration. You know, there's so many great technology solutions out there, but the problem we have been seeing is, you know, teachers are overwhelmed with their teaching responsibilities already, right? So when you bring a new solution, when you bring new tech product, you have to provide a lot of support for them, right? So the technology, like the great technology solution itself, cannot make any impact if you cannot get buy-in from the educators, if you cannot get buy-in from the school leaders, right? And then at the same time, you have to kind of help them figure out the funding issue, you know, how to integrate the technology as part of their teaching practices, their lesson plan, curriculum, whatsoever. And those kind of works require a lot of thinking and a lot of support, you know, not from the pedagogical standpoint, but also from a technical standpoint, management standpoint, right? There's so many questions, there's so many issues we have to figure out and support for teacher, you know, to meaningfully integrate a technology solution as part of their teaching toolkit or a school-wide solution. So over the last 6-7 years, I have been working at college. I provide a lot of like PD opportunity for educators around New York, and also we also offer some online PD programs for educators around the country on how to meaningfully, purposefully integrate technology into their teaching and curriculum. And in terms of mental health, it's a hot topic, you know, especially after the pandemic, people become, you know, like fully aware of the mental impact of the technology. I mean, the mental health and well-being has been always a critical issue and consideration when we talk about technology integration, but it's become even more critical after the pandemic. And I actually heard a lot of stories from teachers who really struggle with teaching their students about social emotional learning, and they actually looking into like technical solutions to help them with their job.
Isn't that interesting, that last part where almost that pandemic and being forced to go virtual helped us actually bridge that like implementation to practice gap. Like we just got to go all in and use some of the solutions that are out there, or maybe we were kind of creating them on our own and now we were just forced to do that as educators. So I love you speaking to that and just speaking totally to how do we work? I love the fact that you are just bridging the gap. How do we take what we know works and get it to teachers so they can actually do their jobs well and we can support them to do that? That's fantastic. Ashley, how about you? What are the projects that you're working on in the spaces that you're in?
So I want to piggyback off of Minh, because what you said about the experience of educators in the classroom, in terms of, I am a mathematics teacher, I'm not a mindfulness instructor, I am not an expert in how a lot of the resources expect teachers to teach the content, and it becomes like an additional burden to them. And so that's where my story starts. I am former educator and school leader from Baltimore City Public Schools. And in my leadership capacity, I was responsible for the emotional health of staff and students. And I was persistently encountering the same problems in the school setting. Pushback from teachers who cared about the SEL state of their students, but hey, I'm not an SEL instructor. This feels overwhelming. There was little to no in the moment data gathering about, one, the efficacy of what we were doing, but also the real-time growth that my students were experiencing. And there was not a lot of interest for our students. You know, there wasn't gamification, or they weren't designing products that were interesting for young people in this space. And so I just personally believe that your life is a reflection of your external landscape is a reflection of your inner landscape. And mental health is the work of healing that inner landscape such that your outer landscape is beautiful, so that you can navigate the stressors of life. So I resigned from my job to tinker and create what eventually became CLOM. I've been doing this work since 2018. CLOM is a mental and emotional health software for school-age children. We work primarily with grades K through 8. We're in 7 school districts right now across the United States. And this is hard work for me. I think that teaching these skills to a young person at an early age provides them with tools that will help them navigate all of the things that they'll encounter in their life, from academic performance to what goes on inside of their homes, to even how much money they have an opportunity to earn later down the line. And let me tell you, in my professional life, I come across adults every day who did not learn these skills in their childhood, and it is evident. I had a peer tell me that taking care of your mental health, your mental and emotional health, is sort of like brushing your teeth. When you don't do it, you feel kind of fuzzy. And not only do you notice it, other people notice it too. So it is just that essential to take care of your mental and emotional health. So I do the work that I do with pleasure and with joy.
I love it. Ashley, I went to the dentist yesterday, so that just like really resonates with me. I love that internal and external landscape too. I'm totally gonna beg, borrow, and steal that from you. That's awesome. Thank you. You can tell your work is so heartfelt. And Grace, how about you? What are you involved in?
Hey everyone, I'm Grace Collins. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a former teacher and a former museum educator. I think most people know me from my time at the U.S. Department of Education, where I was the educational technology liaison for the secretary, and was involved in a number of policy proposals and documents that we put out, including the National Ed Tech Plan, as well as working on the early learners and EdTech plan as well, and a number of other documents. For the past 5 years, though, I've been the founder and CEO of Snowbright Studio, which is a heartwarming game studio. All of our games are entertainment focused from the outside, but secretly, because so many of us are teachers, we're embedding learning into the games. So we do a lot of tabletop games, and we focus on teaching things like conflict resolution and even grief management strategies through play-based experiences, where sometimes the players aren't even aware that they're learning those things. We also publish digital games, and so one of the biggest projects that we've been working on for the past few years is a game called Time Tales, which has 2 time-traveling cats from the 1980s who travel through history and meet historical figures and sometimes mess up the timeline. The most recent incarnation of Time Tales focuses on teaching civics and politics. And if there's one place where Gen Z feels like, and Gen Alpha feels like mental well-being cannot exist, it's politics. And so when we were going into this, we knew that and this is a multi-year project, we knew that we were going to be tackling some really big issues. And when we did pilot study, we confirmed that most students and youth felt like they couldn't talk about politics, they couldn't engage in civics or even try to understand civics unless they were going to become like the people that they see on TikTok and on TV, and they didn't want to be that. So, and that's all not even mentioning how difficult it is to create a history time travel game, because as we all know, history has some pretty terrible moments in it. So, how did we do this? So, I'm kind of here almost as like a developer representative in some ways to talk about how we as developers have been approaching this video game creation process with mental well-being at the forefront. For the past 9 months, we've been participating in a fellowship with the CUNY Center at Sesame Workshop in the development of a framework called BRITEC, which is the Responsible Innovation and Technology for Children framework. So it's a new framework to kind of help developers build from the ground up, something that has well-being and emotional resilience baked into the digital interventions. So yeah, I think that's enough for now.
Just so what just a wealth of knowledge you all have and passion, expertise, just the different areas. Absolutely love it. And you all speak to different parts of who I am as well as a former educator, school counselor. So like SEL, mental health, emotional health, well-being, just like really resonates with me. Former administrator, district level, state level work. Like my work is really on how we can create systems and frameworks to implement this stuff, right? So I'm so excited to dig into that conversation with you on how we actually do this right and do it well. How do we use that implementation framework and that implementation science that we know works to actually bring digital mental health solutions to life in schools? And so I think that's where I want to start. Just for you all, the question is, if you're just maybe sitting down with an educational leader, let's say, who wants to explore how do we even look at digital solutions? How do we start to integrate this work? Like, what would you say? So what would you discuss with that educational leader? So let me just frame the question. You're sitting down with an educational leader, maybe they're on the call right now. What would you just discuss and describe around how digital mental health interventions can uniquely address the current mental health crisis among our K-12 students compared to maybe some traditional methods that we are used to? So Grace, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. I'll full disclaimer, I'm a big believer in human interaction. So my goal, and I've worked in ed tech policy for a long time now, and I always start by saying that like my goal is to never have robots replace humans. And that's not the ed tech agenda or anything else like that. Where technology can help though is meeting students where they are already at. So a lot of times schools don't have the capacity or don't have the time in the day, or they can't get the students over to those responsible adults and humans and mentors that have been shown to make so much change in their life. And so they need other tools to help us rapidly assess broad groups of students, or to raise flags or other sorts of light touch interventions along the way. So I think my first question to any ed tech administrator or superintendent would be, where are your students right now, and where you're interacting with them? I think one other component to this too, and we see this a lot with all kinds of interventions, is that there's a real risk that when you start a new sort of program or activity, you aren't necessarily reaching new students, you're just moving them from one place to another place. So we see this in STEM education. You start a Minecraft club, guess what? All of the robotics students go over there. And it's the same thing when we're doing mental wellness. If you have a program that's already working, see if is it going to be affecting new students, not just the ones who are already engaging in your other services that you've provided to? So, and I think those are pretty standard questions in like the founder community too. It's like, it's the equivalent of asking, where are your customers and how are you going to meet them? And sometimes we don't think that way when we're in schools, but it's just as important to figure out, where are these students and how are we going to meet them?
Oh, I love it. Huge takeaway. Where are they and how are we going to meet them? Where are students spending our time so we can move to them and not have them kind of move to us, right? That we are kind of co-creating that with them. Awesome. Minh, how about you? What would you talk to educators about if they're starting to engage in this work?
Well, so it depends, if you talk to the school leaders, or if you talk to the teachers who actually teach the kids on a daily basis, so normally when we talk to the teachers, the conversation is usually very easy to have because they know the student. They actually know what their students need, so when it comes to like mental health, it's like, yes, I really struggle teaching my kids, how to regulate, how to recognize the emotions. If you have any good solution that I can try out with my student, I would really appreciate it, So that conversation is very easy to have with teachers because they know the issue, they know the needs of their student. But when you bring that conversation to school leaders, right, the first thing come to their mind is how can your new solution or your new program can help kids perform better on standardized tests. And normally they treat these kind of like programs as an extracurricular activities. So I remember like about like 2 years ago, we have a pilot program with some schools around TC to bring VR technology into their school. And we try to find a way, to frame, how the technology can benefit their student, to enhance engagement. You can use VR as the device, for different purposes, right? And including SEL. So SEL was one of the topics suggested by the teachers that we talked to, and they're like, okay, so you have to build a use case for the technology in order to pitch to the school leaders, because they only care about their student performance. They know mental health is a critical issue, but unfortunately, they don't have time, they don't have resources, they don't have money, to fully address that issue, right? So I would say we need to go bottom up. We need to talk to the teachers, right, to understand the student needs, to get the buy-in from teacher, help their students, and then build use case and examples that we can bring to the school leaders. Say, hey, we pilot this kind of technology. We work with like 2-3 teachers, 2-3 classrooms to implement this kind of pilot program for 1 semester, and we see that the students in their classroom actually perform better, or they behave well because of that solution intervention, right? So why would we have a conversation with you to think about how can we replicate, how can we scale up these solutions and use those teachers as the role model, to influence, to inspire other teachers at their school. So I feel like that would be a more effective, more influential, more inspiring approach to work with school leaders, and at the same time kind of scale up the good examples and best practices.
Mm-hmm. I love that. It's like that preparation stage. How do we ensure that our adults, our educators have the right mindsets, the skills, really the investment to say, oh, this is going to work? And oftentimes we need to have the proof, right? What's the evidence out there that's showing us that this works? So then I'm going to invest my time and energy to do this thing in front of students, because oftentimes in school systems, we try to just like, adopt a lot of things, and then kids don't ever receive it. And no kid's going to benefit from something that they don't receive. So how do we create that context for the adult to get bought in and prepared to deliver that work? I love it. All right, Ashley, your turn.
Yeah, the question that I like to start with is, what is the climate and culture in your school buildings as it stands right now? Because this product is coming in to complement whatever else already exists. And so if your climate and culture is not conducive to a healthy mental and emotional space for your students or for your teachers, it's highly unlikely that climb will stick. And so we always like to start with, what are you guys already doing? And where does climb align with what you're already doing? And if your climate and culture strategies are not strong, we want to support you with buttressing that, because it's really essential that you have an established framework, that you have some strong foundation on which to build your product. I agree with Grace. I think that these technology products don't exist to take away from in-person support or in-person care, but it does exist to meet a young person where they are in that moment and to make sure that young people have more access to resources. So we don't go into a school system and say, you know, we're here to save your children. Because that's not what our product is here to do. Our product is here to support you with supporting your student population. And so it's really important, again, that there are frameworks in place. So we like to get a good understanding of what those frameworks are and how CLOM fits with those frameworks and what is the best way to implement our product based off of for that information.
I love it. It's totally using implementation, right? What frameworks do you have in place and how do we integrate it versus just like that one-off approach? And what's like the flavor of the day this week or today or tomorrow, you know, whatever that might be. But how do you put this into a system that you're probably already investing time, money, energy, resources, right? What are the frameworks? So in the chat, those of you who are educators, work in schools or support schools, what frameworks are you currently pursuing? So I think about frameworks like PBIS. Are you using a positive approach to behavior? Are you looking at maybe a statewide and district-wide push on MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support? Are you using RTI? Are you, as Ashley said, climate and culture? Is that really where your focus and framework is at right now? So just drop in the chat. What are you working on right now? That is a spot or kind of a place where you would put mental health, digital mental health solutions to help complement what you are already doing. Because I think that's where we have to start is what are we doing already and how can this support the work that we are doing in order to create better access and really close some of those opportunity and access gaps that we unintentionally create just based on the way our system is set up. So love to see those responses in the chat. What frameworks do you already have? Where would you imagine, you know, placing some of these preventative and proactive youth mental health and well-being measures in place? So I'm going to add a couple of targeted questions in here. Minh, I would love for you to speak to digital tools and how we can effectively integrate them into our infrastructure that we already have. We're talking about frameworks, like what do we do to support our adults to be ready for some of this new work based off of the work that you're involved in?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, so I think first of all, we need to make sure that, you know, whatever technology solution, software, application that we introduce to the teachers is evidence-based. It has to be effective, right? And it has to be proven, first of all, before we even, you know, convince them to spend extra time and effort to learn a new tool, you know, and to implement it with their students. We have to make sure that we have evidence. And then later on, you know, we have to make sure that the technology that we're going to implement in school are actually safe for the children, right? So I know a lot of schools have a very like comprehensive technology review process, you know, looking at data privacy, you know, security, and also accessibility. I feel like those are the big main, you know, consideration when they review a piece of new technology. And then the last part is, which I think is very important as well, is the funding and the cost of the technology, because like those tools can cost a lot of money, you know, ranging from like 10,000 to 20,000, depends on the number of the students, the scale of the school, right? So the cost which usually comes last, but it's actually a very important factor for schools to consider before they adopt. So that's the first thing. We need to make sure that the technology is actually effective. Second thing is, as you mentioned, we have to integrate the new technology as part of an existing system and framework, right? So we have to find an opportunity to bring mental health solution into SEL, to bring into like extracurricular activities, to bring into any kind of clubs that they already have, right? And the benefits of doing that is we can creatively, you know, tap into different resources, you know, funding that they already allocate for those programs and initiatives, right, to pay for the new piece of technology. And then at the same time, they have the human resources, they have the teachers, they have coordinators, already in place to support the implementation of the new technology solution. So existing frameworks and programs that we can tap into is such an important. And I think the third part is, work with teacher, to come up with a way, like after you figure out the framework, you have to work with the school leaders and teachers, to figure out how can you integrate it, because like sometimes the technology is completely novel and there's no way for you to, tap or integrate it meaningfully into what you already have at their schools. So you have to work with them to brainstorm ways, creative ways to bring that technology, to really benefit the students rather than just use the technology for the sake of new technology, right? So I feel like the implementation part is very important. How can you design new curriculum or update your curriculum, your lesson plan to integrate a new piece of technology to really benefit the students rather than, just place the focus on the technology and you don't have any way to support students, to succeed with using the new technology. So I feel like those are the three main important factors or consideration that I would always think about.
Yeah, so that robust selection criteria, like, are we going to be able to sustain this over time? Does it meet the needs of our students? Is it going to meet the needs of our staff? And then how do we create training, coaching, booster, trainings, structured conversations with our adults to be able to help support them to continue to deliver that support? Love it. Thank you. So great. Such good nuggets for how we actually use this in schools that are already running, right? We already have things going on. So how do we make sure it's not overwhelming, but that it can be embedded into what we're already doing? Grace, I'm going to ask you this question. How do you foresee a more robust use and implementation of digital technologies, and not just something that lives in, let's say, a 15-minute morning meeting or some specific time slot during the day?
Yeah, that's hard. I think that's the short version of that question. I think that you can see a lot of parallels in education development over the decades, really, of when something new has, not new necessarily, but a new focus or a new lens has been applied to something, right? Most recently, and I used to be a STEM educator, so I think about it a lot, but most recently looking at computer science, right? And how that didn't really exist in schools, right? And now is recognized as a need, and yet still has had significant difficulties to be able to kind of move things around. And it's this institutional inertia of, well, we can't cut this, we can't do that. How do we fit it in? It's not core. And all of these other sorts of things that I think everyone on this call is probably very familiar with, and the kind of resistance that you get with that. And I think that you can look at computer science and other educational movements for inspiration. And I think when they've been the most successful, it's been because of this mentality of sustaining engagement and building larger infrastructure around it. So I think as innovators, we can make individual impact, but really it's tapping into these broader organizations and then connecting experiences together that provides that kind of snowball effect that you see one state, then another state, and then another one. I do believe that the federal, that there is ample involvement the federal government could be involved in. I also believe at the state level, organizations like CCSSO, and at the industry level, organizations like SIIA, they need to be engaged in this process and in these conversations, and brought across along the way. Another organization, Project Unicorn, if folks are familiar with them, connected to the Dell Foundation, and how they've been able to connect the pipes that have put together things like student attendance and assessment systems and lunch schedules, all those operational tasks that are so annoying sometimes to schools from an operational standpoint, that they're like, yes, of course, we will pay money to just make this annoying thing go away so that it's easier for all of us. And then adoption's not just at the district level, but at state level too, right? Why not wellness involved in this as well, right? There's opportunities for that it's really a prioritization problem, not a technology or an infrastructure problem. So if we can change that prioritization by building this coalition and by getting kind of that snowball effect going, then I think the sky's the limit for it. But it is hard work.
Yeah. It's that change of mindset, right? That this has to be the priority. Like the evidence is very clear that mental well-being is what we need to attend to, and students can't learn if they aren't mentally well and emotionally regulated in a feeling safe and supported and relational with others. And so how do we get that, right? It's just tapping into those resources, our organizations like us being advocates for this work to say, hey, this is what we know and what research is telling us. So here's how we can continue to move that needle and give it the kind of the airspace that it needs during our school days, right? Love it. Okay, Ashley, you are an innovator. You've got a solution that's out there. How have you seen schools and districts work to integrate your innovation throughout the school day or use it to complement other work? And I know you've been intentional about creating implementation supports as well. So what are you kind of doing to make sure that your product gets delivered to kids?
Yeah, we developed a whole process for implementation to create stickiness, essentially, so that one, it's interesting to the kids. Two, it's a low barrier for entry for the stakeholders who are working with young people to implement the product. And then we, of course, provide professional development to districts so that it can be as seamless as possible to integrate the product. And then we're constantly in communication and checking in. So in every district where we are, in every school, we work with what we call a CLOM lead. And that is the person in the building that is like the CLOM expert and is the person that anybody in the building can go to about CLOM. So we're constantly checking in with them. And if there are any issues that come up, we take care of it immediately because we're only meeting our mission as a company if young people are using CLOM and growing their mental and emotional health capacity. And the only way we do that is if we create like a seamless process for integration by like having some sort of stickiness present. We spent a lot of time thinking about that. In fact, when we first, before we even entered the market, we did a lot of testing around implementation, a lot of testing around development. And we actually partnered with the Field Immersion program at Harvard Business School. And they came down and like worked with all of the pilot sites we were working with or collaborating with. And we just put together this massive implementation plan. And like, how do you remove all of the hiccups that can come from implementing a technology product like CLOM? And who are all of the different stakeholders in that space? So you have your parent who may or may not want their child using a wellness resource in a school setting. How do you soothe that parent? You have your district stakeholder. You have your principal, you have your teacher, you have your student. So we were thinking about all of the different players and how to soothe any hiccups that might arise from all of those players. And what are the things that we can do to make sure that all of those things are taken care of? Because implementation is key. You know, a lot of school districts work with a lot of different products, and sometimes they don't even use the product. Like I'm speaking now wearing my teacher hat, having access to all of these resources that I did not know how to use or did not even know that I had access to. And it's kind of like at the end of the school year, it's like, oh, you guys weren't using X, Y, and Z. It's like, no, we weren't. We didn't even know we had access to it. So how to make CLOM a part of, again, the school culture, the school climate, like this is what we do. And we spent a lot of time answering that question and tinkering until we found what worked for us.
I love that, Ashley, and it resonates with me. It's like de-implementation, right? I work with so many school districts that have literally adopted hundreds of things, and we go around and we do needs assessments to say what are kids actually getting. Like not even a handful of them, because they just can't do it. And they've never been trained. To Min's point, like, where's our implementation supports? Are we continuously training around it? So I love the fact that your solution has those embedded, and you sounds like we're problem solving from the beginning. Like, what are the hiccups, as you said, going to come from every different stakeholder, and let's address them before we even roll out a solution, because that's what good solutions have, or good innovations, or good interventions, however you want to call it. That's what they have, is they've already problem solved what's going to get in the way, and provided the yes, the yes and to that. So I like to talk in like more language of barriers, hurdles, and gaps. And I was in a training once where this came up. So this is not mine, so I'm not taking credit for it. But barriers is like that road construction. It's like the block, the cement block. I can't actually get over it. I got to go another way. It's a different route, right? Different path. A hurdle is more of like when I take my son to track and he says, "Mom, come down on the track and come do the hurdles with me." I go, "Yes, and who's going to be there to help me?" Like, I'm not going to be able to get over the hurdle, but if somebody comes on one side and the other, like, we can do this. Like, we can problem solve and use our resources and get over. And then gaps are more those, the knowledge that we need, or the training, or the support that needs to be filled in before we can actually go forward. So let's talk about that real quickly. Min, as a member of the roadmap working group, like, what did you guys do in that environment to set up the roadmap to address barriers, hurdles, and gaps?
Yeah, absolutely. So my short answer is I love the working group experience. It's very comprehensive, very practical, very holistic approach, and it's actually very productive, at the end of the period that we work together. I was kind of amazed of the work that we came up with, So first of all, I really appreciate such a diverse group of industry experts, educators, like school leaders, and then at the same time, we also have a lot of members from association and nonprofit organization who have been working on the mental health issue like for years, So with such a diverse experience and perspective, we brought to the table, so many voices, many experience, perspective. So what we came up with is very, comprehensive, holistic, and practical, because I have been involving a lot of initiative in academia, and I have seen, and one of the problem that I have seen, so many times is, we usually have experts from or faculty or researcher, but we don't necessarily have the industry expert, right, who work on like building those kind of products. We don't necessarily have the school leaders, to have a conversation on how we can collaborate together to bring those kind of ideas, those kind of products, those kind of like programs to school. How can we build a supporting system for teachers to ensure that the implementation is actually sustainable? So to that point, I really appreciate a diverse approach of the working group. And then second thing that I also appreciate is a multi-year project, and the roadmap is actually just a very first step, the first phase of the entire project. We come up with a report with recommendations that school, can consider to implement it at school. And then later on, I know the Headstream also have planned to work with potential funder, the school leaders, to move the roadmap forward. And I'm really looking forward to the later phase of the project, and hopefully we can come up with like really creative solutions when it comes to like funding, when it comes to building capacity for school leaders and educators, and work with software builders and companies to create really good solutions and bring it to school successfully.
Love it. And I think one of those real life hurdles, I'll label it a hurdle. I'll take the liberty of doing that. Alan just put it in the chat, and I would love, Ashley or Grace, if you would be willing to lean in here based off of your experiences. Alan asked, with a youth mental health crisis in the US that correlates with the rise of social media use by youth, how do you parse out a proper and ethical response in providing digital solutions? Ooh, that's a really good question. Either one of
I'll
you?
go first because I feel like Grace will top it off. But technology is just a vehicle. Technology is a tool. You can use that technology in helpful or harmful ways. And so what folks in the mental and emotional health space related for ed tech are doing are leveraging technology for helpfulness. And it's on us, ethically, to make sure that the algorithms that we're using, the AI that we're using, the data gathering mechanisms that we're using will not hurt young people in the long term. So yes, there's a lot of studies that show that the youth mental health crisis is associated with social media. But again, that social media platform is a technology vehicle. It's a tool. And so it's all about the way that we use the tools. And I don't believe that these ed tech resources are here to displace therapeutic services. They're here to provide coping skills that young people can carry around in their pockets. They're also here to push the social framework forward for how we think about mental and emotional health. So you have to think and realize that 10 years ago, we were not having this conversation as a society about mental and emotional health. And so the technology landscape looked that way. There might have been a few very innovative platforms pushing the narrative in that space. And now we are having that conversation as a society. And so there are a lot more than a few. There are a lot more than a few technology vehicles that are pushing the narrative in that space. So it's going to be a whole lot of human with some technology that helps us to push forward and move through this crisis.
Great frame.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I think that this question is bigger than just this call, right? Like this really is a question of our time, and how we as a society interact with these things, how we anticipate our government regulating these things. I think that the Surgeon General's recent warning about social media is very well taken. I think it's one of the reasons why Sesame Workshop felt like creating the right tech framework, and what does it look like to have responsible use of technology? I mean, that's really the question that framework answers. And the fact that we're asking that question in 2024 just shows how little we've all figured that out so far. It is a pressing and urgent conversation for that. I know that with my own kids, and I have young kids, and with my students too, former students, I always emphasize the human. It's one of the reasons why we publish so many tabletop games, because there's nothing that can really replace sitting around a table for 3 hours and seeing how your interactions with them affect them and getting that immediate feedback. It's not like it. For Timetale Civics, one of the big kind of disruptive portions of it, students actually learn civics through the digital game. They get the terms and they get all that sort of stuff. And then they actually have to stop the game. They stop the game, and then they have to do a 30 to 45-minute activity in the classroom with other people. And that constant reinforcement for us is saying, look, civics cannot happen from a book. Civics cannot happen on TikTok. Civics happens when you are interacting with other human beings and making negotiations and discussing and seeing other viewpoints. Anything other than that, it's important, it's relevant, but it's not where civics is coming from. It's not where civics started in ancient Greece and democracy and things like that too. So I think as an educator, my answer would typically be that we have a responsibility to continue to hold the line and not set up these classrooms where it's 30 computers and one proctor who comes in every once in a while. Like, we have to continue to maintain the importance of human connection, if we want to promote positive well-being.
Absolutely. I love it. We could keep having this conversation for probably hours. But we are going to have to kind of wrap it up. I know you all have one kind of tip or trick or maybe action item that you'd share with everyone on the call. And so it's maybe like a 15 to 20 second or just a one word, keep it tight is what I'm trying to say. What would you give as a recommendation as a next step for people who are on this call? Ashley, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I would say if you're here, you're interested and you're doing it. So keep doing what you're doing to support our young people. Keep showing up.
Simple yet so profound. Minh?
I do believe that, teachers are our future, so love your teachers, support your teachers. They know what best for their student, right? So just try to get as much resources, whatever kind of resource like time or financial resources to support the teachers. And usually, when you want to implement a new piece of technology, when you do any kind of like a needs assessment, talk to your teachers. They know everything, but don't usually they have the opportunity to voice up, or they don't have the time, to even bother to raise those kind of issues because they feel hopeless, right? I know, like they know that their students have these kind of issues. They need additional support and resources, but they don't feel empowered to voice up to support their students. So give teachers resource, support, and opportunities to voice up.
Love it.
I'd say for every policy initiative that we had exactly two actions, two tasks in our playbook, and those were convene and amplify. You need to get the people together, and that's not just the high up folks. You need everybody from students and teachers and developers to policy professionals. And then you need to amplify stories that are working. That's how we move the field forward together. So thanks to like Headstream for convening us all here together and for amplifying these stories. And if we continue to do that and continue to get together and continue to share stories that work, that's how you make a movement that affects change.
And we thank you. You have all made such honorable sacrifices to focus on the well-being of our young people, and you've dedicated your careers to that. So thank you so much, Grace and Minh and Ashley, for sharing just the tiniest little bit of your expertise to continue this conversation and push it forward, and how we can really work to create the systems and really take advantage of the resources that are out there to complement the frameworks that we already have in place, and just continue to support the mental well-being and health of our youth. David?
Thank you all so much. I think, Grace, you led us into this last little bit of the session perfectly. And for those of you, if you could just stay on a little bit longer, we have 2 polls for you. So just quick answers to your polls. This is really how we'll continue engagement. Following up this webinar, we'll send you the exclusive version of the roadmap. This is a soft launch, and as Grace was saying, convene and amplify. Our role at Headstream is really to increase awareness around digital interventions for student mental health, enhance existing efforts that many of you are working on, and foster collaboration. There's a particular list of recommendations that you'll get to see in the roadmap that need your help. And a lot of this change will be driven by the humans that we've been talking about, right? The humans that work at organizations, that are creating policy, that are funding and resourcing this work. We're really excited to engage with all of you. If you're able to leave feedback on if you would like to engage in one of these polls, that would be fantastic. We'll also reach out to you by email to create an opportunity and a pathway to engage with you and see how we can bring this roadmap and the other resources that Headstream are developing to your communities, your group of stakeholders, your education system leaders. We're also really excited to announce that as a result of the recommendations that are coming out of the roadmap, we've started work at Headstream on a number of these recommendations. In August, Headstream, Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute, and the JED Foundation will launch the K-12 Mental Health Tech Navigator. This is a guide that supports schools and districts in choosing and using digital interventions for student well-being. I know there was a number of questions that came up around, like, what are the best tools to use? What are best practices? This guide is built to answer those exact questions. It goes into how to braid funding together. It has example products that you can consider using to solve different challenges that might be arising in your schools and districts. We're also going to do, as part of our residency program for entrepreneurs, a segmentation of school districts. So keep an eye out for these two public resources. We'd love to engage with all of you moving forward. Thank you so much for being here. This work is only possible by the time and commitment of folks who join this working group, who join this panel, your guidance and your expertise, and we look forward to collaborating in the future. If you're interested in joining our next webinars, in August, we'll be focusing on operationalizing for mental health within your organization. So whether you lead a company, whether you work at a nonprofit, come join us as we dive into what it looks like to prioritize mental health within your organization. And then in September, we're going to be launching the K-12 Mental Health Tech Navigator that I mentioned alongside the JED Foundation and Meadows. We're excited for that resource to be released and to support schools and district leaders as they look to utilize digital intervention. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. You can follow along Headstream and our work in the Headstream Learning Hub. Keep up to date with what's going on, and we'll see you soon.